Now, it's my opinion, and Mariano may disagree with this. It's always my opinion that there are certain types of dogs and client combinations that we could recommend. You know, the crate may or may not be the most viable option for them, right? And the reason I say the dog and client combination is sometimes there's been situations in my career where I've recommended a crate, and I've also tried to sell a client on it. And that particular client, the way that they are and the way that the dog is, trying to force a crate, an actual like cage crate or like even a plastic crate, might actually make us go backwards in training, because there's so much opposition and so much fight. And, you know, unless I live there with the dog, like me as a trainer, I know I can train a dog in a crate within a couple days, right? However, when I'm teaching people to do it on their own, sometimes I feel I have to start with maybe a plan B or a plan C, which is just isolation in general, right? So there might be some situations where I teach people, okay, put a baby gate in your kitchen, and that's your dog's quote unquote crate or den, right? Or is there a baby gate in your laundry room? That's your dog's crate or den. Sometimes the guest bathroom, sometimes a puppy pen might suffice. The idea here is once I get the dogs or the owners on board with this idea of isolation, and they actually see that the dog can survive isolation, right? Not whining, not barking, not crying, and actually somewhat enjoys it, then I find a window opens up later where I can actually recommend the crate for certain activities like chew training or teaching an anxious dog to relax better, so there's so many other windows that might open up. Again, just a different approach. It's not necessarily the majority that I do this with, but for those clients where there's just lots and lots of friction, sometimes we got to get them to get on board with this idea of isolation first. Once we have that, then we teach them the context in which they could use a crate. That's just my approach personally.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think my only caveat to that, which isn't even like a disagreement, it's just a like, keep this in mind, is I had a couple clients. I'm actually finding there's a ton of Carolina dogs out here in Arizona. And I don't know if that's, and for people who don't know, a Carolina dog is a certain breed of dog that kind of like, it falls into a weird category, kind of like Basenji, kind of like dogs that, I mean, obviously they're dogs, a dingo that have spent so much time undomesticated that they're like quite different from other dogs. There's something that's observable. That's something that people have written about with these like particular breeds. And I had two Carolina dogs recently. One was a board and train, one was a private lesson client. And both of the dogs had a real tough time in the crate. And one of them, the private lesson client, the owner wanted to start using the laundry room, which I was prepared to not have a problem with until I saw the laundry room. And I realized, like, for whatever reason, the water heater is also in there. And there's like a sink and a window and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh.
He can't get out.
Yeah, because this dog, he was crating him, by the way, but the dog was bending his way out of the crate, jumping over the X pen that was around the crate, and then doing stupid things. Like the dog, for whatever reason, had like a fetish for eating literal cactuses that my client had, like actual small cactuses in a pot, and he would eat the whole thing. And like 2 or 3 surgeries later, it looks into training. So I was like, okay, man, look, this is what I would do. I wouldn't use the laundry room only because I'm afraid the dog's going to get out or chew on like a really hot copper pipe or something, spill some freaking steam in his face, So instead, I got him to buy himself one of those like tubular steel, like 70-pound crates.
Those tiger crates.
Yeah, those tiger. I have one for Zeus too. And, and he did a lot better because what I have noticed, actually, and this is a previous dog, but I'll stick to this current dog. What I have noticed is dogs that have issues relaxing in the crate, who like grab the crate with their mouth and kind of pull it inside in order to bend it and get out. When they try that with the heavy duty crate and they realize it ain't moving, real quick, they actually let it go.
Yeah.
I think it's because they're discouraged because the crate ain't going anywhere.
Exactly. Like, they can't manipulate it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they don't even like bother it to that same extent. Oh, and by the way, the Carolina dog that I board and trained, I recommended the exact same crate because the dog had the exact same issue. He bent one of my crates like to hell. And, and I was like, yeah, man, for his own safety, you should really consider one of these. And I explained that whole thing because, of course, the owner was nervous about crating him for that exact reason, which is why they never crated him, because they tried when the puppy was young and he was already bending out like at, 5-6 months old.
Right.
But yeah, man, I just wanted to throw that out there as a little caveat of like, I totally agree that it doesn't have to be a crate necessarily. Confinement work is very beneficial for training overall, you know, especially with COVID. We've talked about that in the past because everybody's home all the time. But if the dog is that much of a flight risk, get yourself a confined crate for the dog's own safety.
100%. I want to try and introduce this, and I want to see if this has any value for anybody. So when I was a younger trainer, one of my managers was guiding me through different types of customers, and different, and when you're learning things, I like to put things in profiles because it helps me kind of understand things a little bit better. And one thing I learned was 4 general types of profiles. I mean, I'm sure there's 5 or 6 or 7, but what I've noticed in my career is that certain clients fall into one of these 4, or sometimes are a combination of the 2, right? And one of the first ones that we run into is a client that we call the relator, right? This is a very compassionate, empathetic, emotional, loving client who wants the best for their dog, right? It's these types of clients that we tend to see a lot of pushback from crate training, right? Because anything that leads to the dog's discomfort or misery or perceived misery, this is what we're going to see a lot of pushback or lack of cooperation with clients. Then we have a client that we call the socializer. And the socializers have a tendency of being very experience oriented, meaning they want to make sure it's a good time. They want to make sure the dog's having fun or the dog's enjoying it, or that the dog is, that the dog is having a good experience, right? They're experience oriented, right? And then we have 2 more. We have what we call the thinker, where this is a person that doesn't do anything unless it logically makes sense to them. It needs to logically make sense, like bullet points. I need to kind of evaluate risk over reward, and it needs to make sense to me. And the way that we explain and teach things to that thinker, it needs to make logical sense. So they don't necessarily care about how much fun the dog's going to have. They care about what's my risk, what's my reward, and what's going to make sense. And then the last one that I was taught was something called the director. And this is an efficiency-based type person, a person who wants things done quick. They want things done efficiently. They want things done right away. And they want things done, unfortunately, sometimes at the best deal, right? And so even though we could say like clients sometimes have a little bit of both, there's one element of each of these profiles that kind of help guide my teaching with certain clients. So for example, we can also split this up into 2 categories. The socializer and the relator are kind of more the emotional clients. They're really feeling based and experience based. And then the other ones are more logical, and like results driven type clients. Okay. And so what I want to kind of explain to you, or explain to everybody, is I want to talk about how we approach different types of clients when it comes to crate training, because I think this could help some of you guys maybe find a different approach, or if you're able to kind of see these characteristics in clients, like how we can help them get on board. Because the reality of it is, we know crate training can help all 4 of these types of clients and help their dogs. However, how we get people on board, we really have to connect with what drives them inside. Okay, so let's go ahead and just do a couple of points, right? So if I was going to prompt Mariano, let's say we were dealing with this relator client, this emotional, loving, compassionate, empathetic type client. What are some points that you would help explain to them to help them get on board with at least the idea of crating?
Yeah, this is something that I've been dealing with again just in the past couple of days. And it's what I do a lot for relators, but also for other people, but I'll stick to relators for now, is I find it very effective to say what they aren't saying, but I know they're thinking.
Like the elephant in the room. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. An example being this. I just had a board and trained dog go home maybe a week ago, like 8-9 days ago. His name was Mac, and his mom is a real sweet person, and had a hard time just kind of being firm with him in general. Okay. So the way that I would approach her with things would be like, I'm talking her through something, an exercise or another, and just based on her face, and she's real polite and real attentive, and she's just like listening to me, and she's a great client. And I would feel like, listen, I can see that this makes you uncomfortable. And I just open up and she's like, yeah, it's just blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, it's totally valid. I want to hear your concerns. I want to know where you're at. It's important that we're on the same page here. And I don't want you to feel embarrassed to feel this way. It's important that I know what you're thinking. So I'll call it out. And then that opens up the opportunity for them to air their side. And I'm like, yeah, I totally hear you. But when it comes to relators, my way to get them on board, to make it logically and emotionally make sense to them, is I tell them, because they're relators and they're feelers, I put them in the role where they feel like nurturing. I'm like, listen, this dog is, you're his mom. He needs you. He needs your guidance. He needs your help. He's stuck. He's whatever. He's nervous. He's like, depending on what the issues are with the dog. And this is how you can help him. And I understand that it's hard for you. I totally get that. And we can talk about that. But I need you to understand what he needs from you is this, and this. You're not bad mom because you crate your dog. You are good mom because you're giving your dog what he needs and you're setting yourself aside to do it. In my book, that's a win. And they typically that will kind of ease them up a little bit, and from there, they at least jump on board enough to try it out for a bit, at which point the benefit starts kind of seeping through because, we'll get into it in the during, but crate training is not really something I do just on its own. Like it's typically in the context of otherwise overall training.
Right.
So the benefit starts to steamroll from everything else. And then once they see the benefit, then emotionally it makes even more sense because they're like, oh my God, my dog actually does enjoy this. This is actually good for him. I'm going to save you, buddy. And and their emotion kicks in, and they're like superhero time.
Yeah, no, 100%. I was actually so captivated by that explanation that I think it's for a young dog trainer who's learning. Remember, that's called the relator because you have to relate to them. They have to know. This is where that quote we mentioned earlier, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. They need to know that you are on their side and that you care about the overall better good of the situation, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what I would add on to that just a little bit, like everything you said, 100%. And I've actually seen you do that in person. And it's amazing how you can get someone, you can stay strong and you can really connect with someone's opinion and then just kind of help shift it over. So that's really awesome. Also, what I think I would want to do, it's my job as a professional to kind of educate them on what could go wrong in the future with the type of dog that we have. Because remember, if you love your dog, you don't want your dog to be a mama's boy. You don't want your dog to be insecure. You don't want your dog to be codependent. You don't want your dog, you want to have a happy, confident dog who can entertain himself when you're away, who doesn't have separation anxiety. So you want these things, don't you? Right? And so I would always kind of tell them what the long-term goal is downstream. So that way the feeling connects. It's not just about captivating them in that moment with relating to them, but it's also letting them know, trust me, I will hold your hand through this and I will help you through the dark times. But as soon as these people, as you said, see that the dog is liking it and the dog's enjoying it and the dog's not fighting it, all of a sudden they become lovers of crates. And I would say that this happens with e-collars and prong collars and choke chains and everything else as well. But yeah, as soon as they see the dog doesn't hate it, automatically we start seeing it.
Oh, dude, that's an excellent point. Yeah, absolutely. The long term, like the why, and that's kind of what I mean when it's like get them on board because it's good for the dog, and then you expand on that, and but absolutely that's a huge point to bring up. Trainers pay attention to that right there. Yeah, I mean, and two, like you talked about when it comes to other tools and stuff like that, people once they see the benefit, then they get it. A lot of times when the more like feeling type of person has a hard time with it. And I keep note of this. They air their grievance because you give them the opportunity to do so. And they, of course, express, the dog, he seems uncomfortable. He seems this, he seems that. Or like when I crate him, he blah, 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 And I think it's worth mentioning. And shout out to Sean O'Shea, who kind of gave me this idea. If the dog is having this issue, that issue, because it's obviously not like, I've never met a dog who came for training just because he wasn't crate trained. Like if he was otherwise perfect, they wouldn't even care, right?
Yeah,
so in the overall view of the dog and their issues and so on, I would explain to people like you have to understand whatever negative association, whatever fear, whatever reactivity that you're afraid of with the crate, that stuff is already there. It already exists. That's why you're here, or that's why I'm here, or that's why, and so it's important that you understand, because dogs can be lost sometimes. They can be stuck on the wrong thing. They can have the absolute wrong idea of what's going on. He thinks right now that he doesn't want to be in the crate, but it's your job to show him. And once they get going, that's what I mean by like dogs let up really easy, because, dogs tend to do really well in the crate. They tend to enjoy their crates. They are den animals. They, it makes total sense for them, but it doesn't make sense for them in the context of like, but I have to protect mom, but I have to protect dad, but
Right. Totally. I think that's a great point. Shout out to Sean O'Shea. What's up, man?